Hey, I'm Grant. Welcome to Second Plate. The origin of this show was that I would often be cooking for myself, and I'd want to make these like really big recipes, but I would always have to buy a huge onion or just a ton of ground beef, and I would never be able to actually get through it all. So the goal of this show was to do one of two things. One, could I make a bunch of recipes that all kind of went from one to the other so I didn't waste ingredients, or could I say take a step back with, say, like bread, whereas instead of buying a whole loaf and just watching a bit of it go bad every single time, could I make it myself? Because I could just have the flour in my cabinet for months on end, but if I had to buy a loaf, it would be pretty much gone in a week or two. So the goal of this was just to kind of bring those two ideas together and make really good, awesome meals without having all that waste. Or you could say scale it up, scale it down without it being a really big deal. So the first one I want to get started with was calzones. The reason behind this is it's been a goal for me for a long time to actually be able to make a pizza. And I haven't yet really accomplished the perfect pizza yet, but calzones are a little bit simpler. And just because they are a little bit more contained, it's not as hard to make a giant thing and mess up, because you can make, say, one on Monday, one on Tuesday. You can save the dough for up so months at a time if you freeze it, and you can just easily whip it together with whatever you happen to have on hand. You don't need some specific ingredient. You can just say, you know what, I have ham, I have bell peppers, I'm gonna make something out of that. So to go ahead and get started, what I did first with this is I actually prepped the dough ahead of time. One of the things I like most about this, because I make a lot of bread myself, is you can actually prepare this totally a day ahead of time. So I made this dough yesterday. I basically, it takes about 10 minutes to go through and do everything, and that way I know for sure my dough is good. I know I ran into the past where I would have something where I make dough and then the day of I realize it hasn't risen, or it just really didn't work out. Maybe my yeast was bad or just something that didn't click. But this I could say, hey, I know it works, I know I'm good, I can go invest in some nice ingredients before I lose the chance of using them. So just kind of cover what goes into this. It's 1 package of yeast. You go ahead and dissolve that in about 2/3 cups of water. You give that, say, like 5 minutes, and then you dump in a cup of cold water, 9 ounces of flour, 3/4 a teaspoon of sugar, 3/4 a teaspoon of salt, and 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil. You go ahead and let that rise for maybe like a couple minutes, because you don't need too much. I usually need it for like 10 minutes after that, and then I go ahead and divide it up. It makes about 2 pounds of dough, and then I go ahead and section that into, right now I'm going for about like 6 sections, but you can easily say make that bigger, make that smaller if you want like a really large calzone. If you want something smaller, say about the size of like a sandwich, you can also do that. I really just like how much you can kind of configure it. You can even go like really like a long-term thing, and you can freeze it for up to a month. Otherwise, I just throw it into, say, the fridge for 24 hours, and it's good for a couple days. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with one of the main ingredients. I have some mild Italian sausage. This was already one of the things that when I went to go make pizza, I could just never really get the taste. Like, I would put in the main ingredients. I would do like pepperoni. I would do, say, mozzarella. But for some reason, it was with Italian sausage that really kind of brought everything together. And I like to start with this because it takes a fair bit to brown. It's really no different than, say, browning ground beef. It's a little bit slightly different in the fact that it really loves to stick together, whereas ground beef will crumble. But I basically have this, all right, here, already heated up. I'm going to spray it down, and I'm going to just take this and start right there. Oh, it usually starts off pretty chunky, so I'm going to split it. Like I said before, like with ground beef, once you brown it, it usually likes to section off. But with this, I always notice I have to kind of go in there and forcibly split it apart. Otherwise, just with the surface area of it, it will take so much longer than it needs to. And really with these, like I said before, you can put in whatever you want. I personally go with Italian sausage, pepperoni, some kind of peppers, onions, tomatoes are pretty good, but it's entirely your call. So this doesn't take too long. I like to throw this on there while I chop my ingredients, because generally you don't need to prep too far in advance. This will just be there nice and kind of cook. It was actually calzones that made me do the recipe for the first time, and working with the Italian sausage. I would never have thought to buy it, but I was surprised about how much it really adds a lot to the dish, more than just, say, any other meat. It's like, it's got spices to it. You can buy like a really spicy sausage if you want that. You can buy a mild sausage, but just like the way it's salted and peppered really adds a lot more than anything else. And I just like it. It was my first time cooking it, and honestly, I was really impressed. And it's something, it just totally won me over, where I gotta have it every time now. Cool, and generally since this is sausage, I've never felt the need to salt and pepper it at all. You can just do that if you want, but really because it's sausage, it's pretty much good to go as soon as you have it. So I'm just gonna talk about what I plan on including in this dish. I personally say I have bell peppers and banana peppers. What I like about banana peppers is there's definitely a little bit of like spice to them, but it's nothing that's too major. Like with jalapenos, not only is it a fairly hot dish, they're also very inconsistent. Like I've always gotten like several jalapenos that are really hot, and then you'll get another one that's like really bland, and it just doesn't really mesh well, because you might make a jalapeno calzone for someone thinking it's gonna be mild, and then you give them one that's way hotter than they ever expected. Or if you go the other way, where if they say they want something super spicy, and you give a pepper that's basically kind of a dud, then they basically are kind of like left wanting. And one thing I want to talk a little bit more about with peppers in general that kind of really surprised me as I cooked with different ones was that I found that, generally speaking, I thought I would want to have fresh peppers. I thought surely that's like the best thing to do. And I was amazed that when I bought canned peppers or like pickled stuff, I had such a better time cooking because it's way more consistent. In fact, if I were to get, say, canned jalapenos, I actually find that I use the juice just as much as the peppers themselves. Because I might want not to add much mass to a dish. So like say if I'm making calzones, like maybe it's already stuffed, because like that's one thing you have to take into consideration. You can't have 20 ingredients because I have to be able to wrap these. But if you want to add a lot of flavor, you can easily say toss in the juice from this can and it will cook off. Like I could easily put this right over the meat right now. It'll cook off, it won't add any mass, but you will be able to taste the spiciness so much more than if I were to just forcibly cram 6 more jalapeno slices into any dish. So that was one thing that really amazed me, and it's totally changed how I approach stuff. Plus, again, then I don't have to worry about, say, my jalapenos going bad or freezing them and unfreezing them. The cans last for a good amount of time. Cool, so this is coming along pretty well. I can go and flip it. Like I said, you can kind of get in here and brown it like you normally would beef. It doesn't crumple because of how just sewn together it is, but it comes along pretty well. So while that cooks, I'm gonna go ahead and prep the rest of the ingredients. That's usually my main workflow, where once this is going, that's pretty much, you can kind of just leave it. It doesn't need as much attention as hamburger would. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the reason I chose what I chose. So generally speaking, I love green peppers. They're cheap. You can always get them on sale. You get plenty. And again, like this is one of the main things that was the source for the show, where this is more green pepper than you could fit in 2 calzones. But I'm gonna have left over. I could easily say, put this in, say, an omelet, or I could use it basically in, honestly, so many dishes because I like peppers. But I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I use that. I love tomatoes, same thing, particularly because they're just tasty. I like to salt them, drain them. You can put them in anything. I use them in a lot of recipes, put them on a sandwich, put them in an omelet. You can put them in a calzone, obviously. And again, they're just like super accessible. You can get them canned, you can get them fresh. Basically, it's entirely your preference. You can kind of just dial in whatever you want. Otherwise, I have onions, another staple I'll just put in everything, where you can get one that's a little bit more garlicky, get like a shallot. You could say go completely garlic only. I like onions just because I use a lot. And again, I use them in other dishes, so I use them in this. Banana peppers, this is actually something I've been trying to go for more recently because I personally prefer jalapenos, but I like the juiciness of a banana pepper. And I think it adds, you need that spiciness in the calzone. I feel like that's a very important piece of it. So I'll go ahead and got my veggies. I'm gonna chop these up. I used to work in a kitchen where we would chop these all the time. And you just kind of get used to it. Really, the only thing you have to worry about with these is you just have all these seeds. And it's not a big deal at all. Like with a jalapeno, taking care of the seeds can be annoying, to say the least. But with these, I'll just scrape it. I've actually gone as far as to say just like wash it. You can kind of lose a little bit of flavor, but if you really don't want any seeds, that will do it. But generally, I just carve this as I see fit. Go in here, kind of tear this around and out. And keep just kind of cutting around. I pretty much always just wing this because based off of each individual bell pepper, you really don't know what's going to be on the inside. Like sometimes I'll cut into one and the core is just like way far on the right and there's just like nothing you can do about it. It's not really a big deal. I know for me the biggest thing when I was learning to cut these was whether or not you prefer to cut it, say, inside out, so like this where I have the outside of the peel down. That's nice because you can get really easy cuts. You can say, I want to cut it specifically into these straight lines. The other call is to say, if you want to cut it outside in like this, it's a little bit different, but I'd say it actually goes a little bit faster. Like I can cut this, for whatever reason, it's just faster from the outside. And there's really no wrong way as far as I know. The only catch with this is it kind of wiggles around a lot more. So I go back and forth with this. Sometimes I go inside out, sometimes I go outside in, but again, no real issue. I pretty much have always learned you cut them into strips, and then you can use these on a sandwich as is, or you cut them down into just like little, I guess you'd call them cubes, although I've never actually seen them come out as actual cubes. That. Cool. Just kind of dice them down a little bit. Again, I have no real standard. I like very chunky peppers, regardless of what kind of pepper it is, just because that's how I am. Generally, the rule I've learned is if you want to bite into whatever you're cooking and you want to taste specifically a bell pepper, you want big chunks so that you know I just hit a bell pepper. If you instead want to have everything vaguely taste of bell peppers, you go for small chunks because you get lots of surface area and it's going to basically touch everything in your dish. And that's just another way where like I said, I like to keep notes on my little dishes as I do stuff. I have just this little black notebook where when I'll do a little recipe, I'll write some stuff down where it's like, oh, maybe go a little bit thinner when you cut this, or say maybe cook this just a little bit longer. Just little things like that to continually experiment, because I think that's the big thing where even on the show where I kind of know what I want to do before I sit down to do it, I still am like, you know, I'm going to try this. I'm going to say maybe I want to roll my calzone a slightly different way, or maybe cut it at just a slightly higher temperature. Sorry, cook it at a slightly higher temperature. Just little things that, you know, that's how I feel like you not only kind of learn what actually affects things versus just following a flat out recipe, but also what you like. Like there's plenty of times where I would read stuff, but it wasn't until I actually like tasted it that it just like really clicked with me and what I wanted personally. Plus, I think that's probably the best way to learn some of the mechanics of cooking. So stuff like, I know with calzones, for example, or say I was cooking Philly cheesesteaks not too long ago, I knew I was always wanting to put like a ton of veggies in, just like all these like green peppers, jalapenos, what have you. And that's fine. Like that's something where flavor-wise, that is fine. Like you can have all those things. But mechanically, it wasn't until I actually cooked it and began experimenting with the dish that I realized if you put in too much, even though individually all the ingredients are fine, basically the vegetables will soak up too much flavor, if that makes sense, and you won't get that savoriness that you kind of expect out of that. But I wouldn't know that unless I sat down and like, you know what, I'm going to try this slightly different, or like, I have a theory, I want to see how it comes out. Okay, going to go and keep chopping these. We are going to be cooking these down, so that's why I don't mind the juiciness of this tomato. Generally, if I were to say make tomatoes for, say, an omelet, or just any kind of tomato dish, one thing that I wasn't aware of until I started kind of cooking more as a hobby is generally you want to salt and drain your tomatoes. So I would say chop it up or cut into thirds or chunks, what have you, and I would put them in a small little like sieve or a funnel, really anything, a strainer, and I would just kind of like salt it down, toss it a little bit, and just let it kind of, all the juice kind of soak out. And it sounds like it shouldn't make a big difference, but it really does. And again, it's not hard, you just need to know that you need to do it. Plus, again, like the more dishes I have like this where you can kind of use it all together, the easier it is to do things like that where I'm just going to say cut the 2 tomatoes and prep them for whatever I make because I know I have 3 dishes I can cook them in, no matter what. The other thing I want to kind of talk about, since I mentioned the moisture, is the reason it's important with calzones to kind of pre-cook all of the ingredients is a calzone is sealed. So again, learning about the mechanics of a dish, one thing I learned personally from cooking this recipe is if I were to say toss these tomatoes in just raw, like they're just wet, properly chopped, that should be fine. You wouldn't think of it, but it will pop the calzone because there's no way for that to get any steam out. And it's not like, say, like a stromboli or something where you could, or even a pie where you would like cut a slit, because if you do that, it's not going to just let the steam out, it's going to force everything out entirely. And you don't want that either, because then it's just going to be leaking a ton of juice, cheese, probably some veggies, and you don't want that. You want it entirely sealed. So by cooking it down first, what I'll be doing is cooking it over like, say, a medium heat to keep the flavor, but basically get rid of all that excess moisture. So here we have these, as well as, like I said before, some onions I had from a previous recipe and some banana peppers from basically a can. Gonna go over here and check on the Italian sausage. Cool. It's coming along pretty well. There we go. Generally, I really like to char it myself personally. Get like a blackened edge. But generally, once you see this and you like it and it's done, you're good to go. Another thing that I would like to cover about why making this is kind of an interesting little recipe is everything in it, other than the dough, is done once you go. You're good. So I don't really need to worry about oh, did I cook the meat enough? Did I wait for all the veggies to be done? Once the dough looks good, I'm good. I can pull it out. Basically, once you have everything together, the main thing is to bring in the dough, which I have right here. Again, I made this essentially last night. It's very simple. It's just, if you've ever made bread before, it's the same basic process, just with a couple tweaks to the ingredients. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I have some flour here. I'm going to just pass this around. I want to use as little as possible because at this point the recipe is already kind of accounted for, everything that should be in there. So I don't want to come in and dump a whole cup of flour on my dough. Just enough so it doesn't stick. And I actually sprayed down this pan. Really, you could also go the other route where you say put more dough in the first time. But I like to leave enough where I can add it because personally it always seems to stick. So I'm just going to kind of pat this down. With the way I make calzones, because this is meant for usually one person, maybe two, this is not enough dough for you to say toss it up into the air and do anything crazy with it. So we're just going to pat it down. I'm just going to use a rolling pin I have right here. And I'm just going to flatten this out. For this, personally, I don't go for a circle. I want just kind of like an oblong shape because I need to fold it in half. And you don't necessarily want a deep pocket. You basically want a very long pocket so you can get a lot of ingredients in there and it doesn't kind of bulge. So basically, I want it to be a tube, not a sack, if that makes sense. So I just kind of roll this out. I like to think about how these were probably, I assume, traditionally made, where they were never perfect circles either. So if this comes out and it's just kind of a little oddly shaped, and I got to stretch the dough in a way I didn't expect, or say if I want it more this way, I can kind of just go like that. It's not a big deal at all. The whole point is just winging this. Like one thing I like about this recipe is, like I said, it makes essentially 6 portions. And when I would work on this recipe and trying new things, I would purposely cook, say, 1 a night and be like, you know what, that was good, but it was really oddly shaped, or hey, I put in some odd ingredients and it kind of did stuff I didn't want. So let me not do that. You see me like anywhere it's kind of sticking to my rolling pin, I just kind of like pat it down with flour. You really can't, once it's pretty much squashed, put too much flour on it because it just won't go in. Really, the concern now is not it going into the dough, but you'll have that dusting of flour on the top, which you can usually just kind of scrape off at the end, or if someone eats it, it doesn't really affect anything. It's pretty minuscule in comparison to everything else. So then here, this is going to be the basis for my calzone right here. And I'm going to start with one very specific element. I have ricotta cheese here. This was something when I was researching how to make calzones that I wasn't really aware of that was actually big is there's only 2 cheeses you put in a calzone. It's very specific. You put in ricotta and sometimes mozzarella. So I'm going to go ahead and take a fair chunk right here. And you'll notice, like you would think, like if this was, say, a pizza, this is where you would put in the sauce. But that's another key element about calzones, if you're doing it in a traditional style, is you never put sauce in a calzone. It's always dipped. So that's actually going to impact the sauce I make or choose whenever I do this. Now, I want to talk about how you'll notice I'm only spreading this on the left side. I like to think of it as there's a line down the middle where this is where I am going to fold it up and over. So I'm trying to put everything to the left because this is going to be my pocket. So I don't want anything here because that's where, if I put too much there, you're going to over account, and that's where you're going to get, say, tearing of the dough. Plus, this helps it just kind of like stick together. So I'm just going to spread out my ricotta, put that back. Then I would generally put, say, spinach, pepperoni, all your flat ingredients right there. But I'm actually going to go straight for my banana peppers because they're nice and flat. And again, this is something I always really love to stress on this show is there's taste and then there's like ease of eating. So that's why I like to build these from flat ingredients up. So you don't get, say, a pocket full of nothing. Or you don't get, say, this one really hard section that bulges out through the dough. Okay, I'm going to try then and fill these little gaps with some onions. And again, this is something where you can totally dial this in entirely to be what you personally want. Like ever since making this recipe, I've kind of been craving doing, say, just like a little calzone party where I go ahead and I pre-make, say, 6 of these and just say, hey, I've got them like this. I got the ricotta all spread out. You guys just put whatever you want in here. I'll wrap them up and they'll be done in like 20 minutes. It's something where everyone can have something that's very custom to them, or likewise, if you're cooking for yourself and you have the dough just in the refrigerator, each day you can do something drastically different and it still comes out okay. Okay. Gonna go ahead and set my lid right there and begin to grab some of this sausage. I like to leave it to the last because it's by far the lumpiest of the ingredients. So I want to take care about where I place basically each individual one of these. And it doesn't matter if like 1 or 2 ingredients fall out. It doesn't matter if it begins to leak. Generally speaking, like I said, I've done this, I think about 18 times in practice for this recipe, essentially 3 batches. And you just get better and better and you understand like what you want. So like I've definitely gone more and more towards veggies because you can really taste the sausage and it adds a lot. But the veggies I like, you know, I want more like peppers, or I want more spice or less spice, or I want to spread it out. Like those are all these little things you can do to kind of slowly improve. So next thing is I just have simple mozzarella. This is basically going to be the glue or cement that I fill in all these little gaps with. And this is something where, again, just totally dial it in. I know some people who would just take this entire dish and you just toss it in there. And if it leaks, it's just that much better. But I view it as I'm just filling in what's left of the pocket so that I can just get it all to stay nice together like that. Okay. So now we have this dough. It may look like there's no way that this can fit, but if you notice when I was actually rolling out the dough, it's still very stretchy. So what we are going to do is we're going to take that dividing line. I'm going to lift this up and over carefully and get it right where we want it to seal. Perfect. Looks like I have a little extra dough, so I'm just going to get kind of creative. If I want to, I can even just patch that. Again, just kind of learning. I could leave it open even too, because you'll be surprised. Like this looks very thin. Once I put this in the oven, it will really rise. So I'm going to clear this of any flour. And this is probably the most visual, but honestly not as important part. I'm going to take this outer edge right here. I'm going to press it down. I'm going to take the outer edge, roll it up and over, and that's how you get your little seal. And kind of press it down. So I'm just kind of going up, over, increasing, up, over, increasing, up, over, increasing, all the way around. Like I said, if you have excess dough, feel free to peel it off now. If you want more, just stick it somewhere else. And again, it's totally not the end of the world. Like you might have some leaks, you might have just a little bit coming out, you might have just a big batch of dough. It's like, it's okay. It's all just kind of like learning and just seeing what you like or maybe how the dough came out. All that's totally fine because it's really unlikely I'm going to have this tear in half in the oven. There's no stress on it. So I like just kind of get a good, nice form. And then the best part about this is it finally gave me reason to use this giant metal spatula here. So I'm just going to kind of edge under, trying not to tear this dough. And now I have my first calzone. I have this tray right here, which is going to go ahead and put in this oven. And I have it set to about 400 degrees. That's generally where you want to cook pizza. You can go basically less if you want to go do a slower cook. You go higher, particularly if it's thinner. Like for example, if I was going to say cook ones basically about the size of my fist, I would go pretty much probably more to the 450 side because the inside is going to cook pretty fast compared to the outside. Or I'd say not as differently to the outside. Whereas if you, say, take this same recipe, I've done it before, and basically make calzones you're meant to split with 2 people, and you end up with like 2 giant sections, you want to go 10 more to like, say, the 350 range, because you want the inside to kind of like cook. The goal for this at the end of it is you want the dough to be done, but the inside to be just barely like crisping. If you know, say, like a stromboli, that's one thing where they differ, where I want the inside of a calzone to be soft, but the outside to be done. Whereas a stromboli, I want the entire thing to be crisp all the way through. So now that I have basically my 2 calzones ready to go, generally you can brush them down with a couple things. I'd say the classic thing would be just olive oil. I've done something as simple as just like, say, spraying them down with canola. You can do, say, milk, again, if you want a very soft crust. You could do eggshell if you want very crunchy. Basically, it's something where you may have not heard of that before, but like if you ever had like a baguette, like that's something that's brushed down with a egg white. And you don't even have to use anything at all. But I do feel like this adds a little bit more. Like if you want more of like a, like I said, literal pizza taste, then olive oil is the way to go. Some of this will run off or just cook, so it's not a huge deal, but it does add just a nice little touch. Then we're gonna go ahead and put these in for about 10 to 15 minutes. The goal for this is I'm mainly looking to see once this is kind of a light golden brown. So just gonna put those right in. And they will cook. So about after 10 to 20 minutes, you can go ahead and see the calzones. They'll start getting kind of a dark brown on the top and a lighter brown on the bottom. That's basically the cue to kind of pull them out. Again, as long as the dough looks to be the right way that you kind of want, the insides are actually already done, so really you have a lot of leeway of pulling this stuff out. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. All right, so we have our 2 calzones right here. I'm gonna go ahead and use this and dish it up next to my sauce. Again, one of the main points about calzones is you actually put sauce on the outside, never inside, and you always dip. So as part of that, I actually have a sweeter sauce, because you really can kind of dial it in again with how much you dip. So I like having one that's sweet and you can really notice it, compared to, say, something that is a lot more mild and you won't even notice. It seems like the perfect time to kind of include that. So here we have our calzones served with our pizza sauce. I'm Grant, this has been Second Plate. Again, the point of the show was to take a lot of ingredients like, say, the fillings of this calzone, things that I would want to reuse without them going bad, or say my basic staples like my flour, like my yeast, and really bring them in and make something awesome without having all those ingredients lost. So this is something where I'm so glad it kind of came out, and I really think it's something worth trying at home. But thanks for watching. It's been a fun time, and I'm really eager to see how these actually turned out.